Hey, everybody, welcome back. You can still see my screen, right? It's the same slide as before. Cool. What questions came up from that exercise and the discussions that you all had? Cool. If nobody has questions right now, could you give me a hand raise if you were able to get through at least, how many of these are there? At least 5 of these bullet points? Excellent. Cool. Okay, then in that case, can I have a volunteer to walk through what you came up with? Great. Share your screen and show us how you did this. Let me put all your hands down. Any volunteers? Go ahead, Ben. Do you want to share your screen?
Sure, yeah. Let me get the right one. I don't think I can while you are
Oh, shoot.
sharing.
I forgot. Try now.
There we go.
Perfect.
So, we were messing around. I'm gonna get rid of this. So I have a superclass called Animal, which has I struggle to think of just random things to put in the initialize. With speak and eat with that just return strings. And then my cat class that inherits from animal just kind of eats the initialized arguments or the attributes that are from the parent and then overrides the or just like has a new method. But this class then also has both of the speak and eat. And then this dog class that inherits from animal does the same thing, and it overrides the speak to say something different. So, did you want me to run the runner file, or?
Yeah, maybe in a second. Let's talk about it like in a little bit more detail, step by step first.
Yeah.
So let's start by like, how would you describe the relationship between your animal class and then the others?
So do you want me to like use in terms of trying to relate it to Rails, or just kind of general Ruby
Let's stick
language?
with general Ruby because we're
Okay.
working in Ruby now.
Yeah. So this animal class has the state and behavior that then is shared by the cat and the dog class.
Gotcha. Yeah, good. And the way I might say that is that like I think you probably mentioned it with the whole overview, but your cat and your dog classes are inheriting from the animal class, right?
Mhm.
Cool. How would you describe, like, how does Ruby look for? I guess this is a good time for us to go to your runner, actually. So why don't
Okay.
we run this and see what we get?
I'll take. So I have both of the dog and the cat printing their speak values, and then the color.
Okay.
I'm going to do this just so it's nice and neat.
Thank you.
And so the woof is coming from the dog speak, the gur is coming from the cat speak, and then they both have the brown color.
Awesome. So let's just talk through like how Ruby understands to do this. Like where and in what order? What's a good way for me to ask this question?
Like the higher, like the scope hierarchy, is that what you're getting at?
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Or like yeah. So what happens when you run? If we can go back to your runner file real quick. So when you run p sparky.speak, where is Ruby going to look for that method, that speak method first?
So since it's being called on this dog instance method, it's
Mhm.
gonna hop into this dog. And first it's gonna look for a local method defined in the scope of this class.
Mhm.
Um, and it finds one, I think it was big. Yeah.
Mhm.
And because it found this one, it won't look anymore.
Awesome.
Because in the words of Mike Dow, once you've found your keys, you don't keep looking for your keys.
Yep. Very good. Cool. So if that did not exist on your dog class, then theoretically what would happen? Like if you were
Right.
to comment that out.
Yeah. So if this is no longer here, since it doesn't see any of the local methods defined as speak, it then goes to, I think it then actually goes to maybe an instant, like an attribute to see if there's an reader there. Not sure, but then I think it defaults to going up the chain into the parent class and looking for the method there.
Awesome. Yeah. And like another way to say that might be it looks to the ancestor, right? Or to the superclass. So you're in a class and then you have a superclass and maybe that class has a superclass. And aside from things like, attributes or modules, which we won't get into too much today, aside from that stuff, it's just going to keep going up that ancestor chain, kind of like you described. Excellent. Cool. Yeah. So I think that's all the questions I have for you right here. Thank you.
Cool.
Does somebody else have anything different to share before we move on? Like, did you do something in a different way, or just love to look at one more example if anybody wants to volunteer?
I have a question, if I could just ask a question.
Let's do that. What's up?
I'm still always confused on the require relative. I remember I was explained what require relative is and like what's require. And I just forget I used require relative and it just worked. So
yeah,
I just forget where to use, like which one should I use, or which like specifically should I use in which case?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think I'm not lying to you when I say that require relative is going to look relative to the file that you're in. So you would give it the path as if you're navigating from there, and require, I think, will look from the root of the enclosing folder. Am I misspeaking? Brian, can you speak to that at all? Because I honestly, like, require and require relative are not things that we use very often in Rails, right? Just when we have small Ruby projects like this. So I might be missing out on like a best practice there.
No, I think you've got it. Require relative to the file, and require is relative to, it's relative to where you're running the command from.
That's it.
But yeah, it doesn't, with Rails, we don't really worry about it. We never have to require anything.
Thank you. Thank you. Any other questions or thoughts? Cool. Okay, let me check my notes here real quick. Right, so now that we've had a chance to do this inheritance practice and in Ruby and talk about it a little bit, let's see here. We can spend some time talking about inheritance in Rails. So let me share my screen. So models and controllers inherit from application record and application controller respectively. And methods defined in application record, for example, are inherited by all models. So if we were to imagine maybe we have a Rails app with a dog model and a cat model, and we define some method in application controller like days in shelter or something like that. That would be a method that we would be able to use for any of our animals, because all of our models in our app are going to inherit from application record. And the same thing goes for application controller. So any action or any method that you define in application controller, you can use in any of your controllers. So this is kind of where we would start in practice with some of these inheritance concepts. Here's some more examples. So maybe a search by attribute method in application record. It's not specific to any particular model or any particular model's attribute. So if you were to give that method defined in application record that data that it would need to do its job, then you could use it on any model, right? Current user method defined in application controller is another like really good use case for knowing who's logged in no matter what controller you're in. So that's just a very brief overview of how we would maybe start to think about this in Rails. We have another practice, another exercise to start implementing this in Rails. And we're going to do this the same way. So I'll give you all 10 minutes to work independently and then 10 minutes to work together and or discuss what you noticed. But before we split out into breakout rooms or do any of that, I figured let's take a quick pause and come back at 1:38. Cool. I'm going to open up some breakout rooms here shortly. And just as a reminder, you can spend the time in these breakout rooms discussing things that went well or things that went unexpectedly. Maybe reasons why this might be useful in Rails apps, all those good things. So I'll open up those breakout rooms for like, maybe not quite 10 minutes so that we have enough time to come back for any questions.
I hit the exit button early.
It happens.
I was like in the middle of conversation.
Oh no. All right, welcome back, everybody. We're getting pretty close to time. I do want to say, like, if you need to leave right at 2, please go ahead and go on to work time. Just fill out the survey that's on the calendar if you could before you go. But other than that, I thought I would leave off on this slide, which y'all can see, right? The graph here. This is something that I found really helpful when I was learning and thinking about inheritance to diagram out in my journal. So you all can, I'll leave that up for people to look at and maybe copy down or diagram in your own journals or Google Docs. But for anybody who doesn't need to leave right away, were there any other questions that we can talk through before we end today? Yes, Angel.
Do you have a example of what you would put in the action controller
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up.
or application?
Application controller, yeah. So that last bullet point may have been kind of challenging, the creating a method that could be used in any controller. So it's more of like a thought exercise and an extension point than actually refactoring the models, which I saw some people doing a really good job of moving that model logic into the application record file and using some of what we learned in our class versus instance methods lesson earlier today. But as far as application controller, most of the practical uses for most of the practical applications of like putting a method in application controller that can be used anywhere are going to have to do with things like authorization, authentication, and just generally stuff that we haven't covered yet and that we won't get into until mod 3. But hopefully you all got a chance to just experiment with it and see like how that inheritance works for controllers. One thing I noticed a few people reaching for, which is very natural, I think, is looking at, okay, well, I have all these controllers with a show action and it runs the same line of record of active record almost. Can I refactor that and dry it up? And the answer to that specific example is no. That can get really meta really quickly. For things like that, like our CRUD actions, having those kind of repetitive methods in each individual controller is totally normal and okay. But what I wanted to demonstrate or hope, like I wanted you all to see in action is that your controllers can inherit from other controllers the same way that your models inherit from application model. or application record, I'm sorry. So when you do get to things like needing to know if a user is logged in at any given time, that's a place where that can go and be accessible to you in any controller that you're using. Angel, does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Of course. Anything else? What questions came up? What questions do you all have? Alexa?
So I have a question. Initially, I made my own parent class. I didn't realize I could go right within the application controller.
Mhm.
And I'm just wondering if there's ever a time where you would kind of have more than just the application record inheriting to the models.
Yes, definitely. I think I mentioned earlier, but this is like another good example of how you can have a class that has a superclass, and then that class can have a superclass, and you can keep that chain going. So I could see a world where maybe you have like a shelter app, and you have employees, and then you have pets, and maybe they both inherit from application record. But then, as you were saying, like you have this other parent model of pet, where you could have like fish inherit from pet and cat and all those things. But you wouldn't necessarily want your employees to be able to do all the things that pets can do, right? So maybe that's where you could branch the two out and have a couple of different, I would think of them as like ancestor chains or ancestor trees. Is that helpful?
Yeah, very. Thank you.
Of course. Anybody else? Cool. Okay, well, thank you all. I know it's a little bit of a short lesson to be looking at a lot of stuff, but as always, feel free to post in the code help channel and tag Brian and myself if there's anything that could use more clarification. Please don't forget to fill out the survey before you hop off, and I'll see you all later. Thank you.
Thanks, Jameson.
Thanks, Jameson.
Thanks.